He was a Navy SEAL trying to leave war behind. But on a quiet autumn road, the forest answered with something that wouldn't stay silent. 2 German shepherds lay broken on the roadside, beaten, bleeding, and left to disappear. Tire tracks vanished into the trees, carrying more than cruelty, a hidden trade that thrived on fear and neglect. Their lives were slipping away, and the only one who stopped was the man who knew what it meant to never leave anyone behind. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. Autumn arrived early in northern Montana. In Ashwood Ridge, it always did. By late October, the town wore fall like a second skin. Thin smoke curling from chimneys, maple leaves gathering along wooden fences, the air sharp with pine resin and cold metal. The sky that afternoon was a pale steel blue, stretched tight and cloudless, promising a freezing night once the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. Ashwood Ridge itself was little more than a scattering of buildings tucked between forest and mountain, a gas station, a diner with fogged windows, a ranger outpost, and a single main road that surrendered quickly to dirt and shadow. Beyond the last mailbox, there were roads without names. Ethan Cole drove one of them. His truck moved slowly, tires crunching over gravel and damp leaves, headlights already cutting pale tunnels through the growing dusk. The forest pressed in on both sides. Dense firs, bare aspens rattling softly in the wind. No cell signal, no radio stations, just the low hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Ethan was 29, tall and lean in a way that came from discipline rather than vanity. His dark hair was cropped short, practical. His face carried the quiet stillness of someone who had learned to keep his thoughts contained. Dressed in a weathered jacket, flannel shirt, and worn boots, he looked like any other man driving home before nightfall. But his posture, alert even behind the wheel, betrayed years of training that never truly shut off. He had left the naval base 6 months ago. The uniform was gone. The habits remained. The road bent sharply to the left, narrowing as it dipped into a shallow hollow. That was when Ethan saw them. At first, he thought it was debris, fallen branches, dark shapes half hidden by leaves. His foot eased off the accelerator without conscious thought. Something about the way the forms lay didn't match the randomness of nature. Then his headlights caught fur. Jesus! The word left him quietly as he braked. 2 German shepherds lay near the edge of the road, bodies twisted at unnatural angles. Their coats, once thick and proud by the look of them, were matted with mud and darkened blood. One lay on its side, chest barely moving. The other was sprawled face down, hind leg bent wrong, jaw stained with dry red. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Ethan killed the engine and stepped out into the cold. The air hit him hard, biting through his jacket. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called once, then went silent. He crouched beside the nearest dog, careful not to touch yet. The animal's eyes were open, clouded with pain, unfocused. Its breathing was shallow, too shallow. Ethan placed 2 fingers lightly against the dog's neck, counting the weak pulse. Still there, barely. "Hey," he murmured, voice low, steady. "You're not done yet." His eyes moved automatically, cataloging injuries the way he had been trained to assess wounded teammates. Swelling along the ribs, blood crusted around the muzzle. Bite marks, not from another animal, but from something blunt, repeated, intentional. Anger flared, sharp and cold, but he locked it down. Emotion came later. Right now, there was work. He reached for the second dog. This one stirred faintly when his shadow fell across it, a low, broken sound vibrating in its chest. The back leg was mangled, bone pressing dangerously close to skin. Ethan swallowed once. "Okay," he said softly, more to himself than to them. "Okay." As he stood, something caught his eye near the edge of the road. He walked a few steps farther, boots sinking into damp earth. There, pressed deep into the mud, was a tire track. Wide, aggressive, the tread pattern was unmistakable. A pickup truck. Paint flecks clung to a broken branch nearby. Dull red, scraped fresh. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't need to imagine the rest. He'd seen scenes like this before, just with different uniforms and different excuses. Someone had done this on purpose, and they hadn't looked back. Ethan moved fast now. He returned to his truck, pulled a heavy blanket from the back, and knelt beside the dogs again. His hands were steady as he checked airways, adjusted positions to protect spines, minimized movement. He spoke constantly, a low stream of calm reassurance. Not because he knew the dogs could understand every word, but because he knew fear recognized tone. Easy, easy, I've got you. One of the dogs shifted weakly, eyes meeting his for a brief second. In that gaze, glassy, exhausted, still fighting. Ethan saw something that punched through him harder than the injuries. Recognition, not of him, but of something older. The look of a being who had trusted the world and been punished for it. He had seen that look in mirrors after missions, in the eyes of civilians caught in the wrong place, in the silence of men who survived when others didn't. War had taught him that suffering didn't always come with uniforms. He wrapped the first dog carefully, lifting with controlled precision, supporting the spine and hips the way he had once supported injured Marines under fire. The dog made no sound as Ethan laid it gently across the back seat, padding the space with jackets and blankets. The second was heavier, muscles still powerful despite the damage. Ethan adjusted his stance, lifted smoothly, teeth clenched against the strain. The dog whimpered once, then fell still again. "I know," Ethan whispered. "I know. Hang on." The light was fading fast now. The forest shifted from gold to deep shadow, the sky bleeding orange at the horizon. Ethan slammed the truck door shut, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. As he pulled back onto the road, he glanced once more at the red tire tracks disappearing into the trees. Whoever had done this thought the forest would erase their mess. They were wrong. The truck surged forward, tires spinning briefly on wet leaves before catching. Ethan drove faster than he normally would on a road like this. But not recklessly. Controlled. Intentional. Every movement measured. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching back to touch the blanket, grounding himself in the presence behind him. The dogs were still alive. That was what mattered. The sun dipped below the ridge, and the forest swallowed the last of the light. Headlights carved through darkness as the road twisted deeper into the trees. "Stay with me," Ethan said quietly, his voice firm now, edged with promise rather than comfort. "I don't leave anyone behind." The words weren't dramatic. They were simply true. The truck disappeared into the autumn woods, racing the cold, the night, and whatever consequences waited at the end of the road without a name. The lights of Ashwood Ridge came into view just as full darkness settled over the forest. The town at night felt smaller than it did by day. Porch lamps glowing like cautious eyes, the single diner already closed, the mountains pressing close as if listening. Ethan Cole turned into the gravel lot of the only veterinary clinic within 40 miles, its sign flickering softly in the cold. The building was old but clean, a low structure with white siding and a faint smell of antiseptic that cut through the damp pine air. A woman was already stepping out as Ethan killed the engine. Her name was Dr. Miriam Holt, though most people in town called her Doc Holt. She was in her early 40s, tall, with iron-gray hair pulled into a practical knot at the base of her neck. Her face was sharp but not unkind, marked by long hours and hard decisions. She took in the scene. Ethan, the truck, the two bundled shapes in the back seat, with one swift practice glance. "Bring them," she said, already moving. "Careful with the one on the left." Inside, the clinic was quiet except for the hum of old fluorescent lights. A younger man followed her in. Lucas Reed, her veterinary tech. He was broad-shouldered, early 30s, with a soft voice that didn't match his size. He moved quickly, laying out towels, preparing IV lines without being told. The dogs were transferred onto metal tables. Under the brighter lights, the damage became undeniable. Dr. Holt worked in silence at first, her hands steady as she palpated ribs, checked pupils, listened to breathing. Her jaw tightened just slightly. "This wasn't a vehicle strike," she said finally, "not the way people think of accidents." Ethan stood back, arms folded loosely, eyes fixed on the table. "One has fractured ribs, at least 3. The other has internal bruising, likely abdominal trauma, and the patterning on their bodies." She exhaled slowly. "Repeated blunt force. Controlled. Someone hurt them on purpose." Lucas glanced up, anger flashing across his face before he forced it down. Ethan nodded once. He hadn't needed confirmation, but hearing it spoken made something settle into place. "They'll live?" he asked. Dr. Holt met his gaze. "If they're stubborn, shepherds usually are." The next hours blurred into measured urgency. IV fluids, X-rays, oxygen masks. Ethan stayed, leaning against the wall, saying nothing, present in the way he'd learned mattered more than words. When Dr. Holt finally stepped back, removing her gloves, there was fatigue in her posture, but resolve in her eyes. "They're stable," she said. "Not out of danger, but they're fighting." Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. While Lucas cleaned up, Ethan noticed something half-hidden beneath the thick fur at one dog's neck, a small bulge under the skin. He leaned closer, careful. "Doc," he said quietly. "Do you mind?" Dr. Holt followed his gaze. "Microchip," she said. "Old model by the feel of it." She retrieved a scanner, passed it over the area. The device beeped, then displayed a string of numbers. Ethan memorized them automatically. "Owner's local," Dr. Holt added. "Registered years ago. Name should be attached." She turned the screen so Ethan could see. Walter Grayson. The name sat heavy in the air, old-fashioned and solid. Ethan felt the shift, not yet understanding why, but recognizing the gravity of it. "Address?" he asked. Dr. Holt hesitated. "He lives out past the East Ridge, cabin in the woods, keeps to himself." Ethan nodded. "I'll find him." Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling leaves across the empty lot. Ethan drove again, this time slower, the forest even darker without the urgency of sirens or speed. The road climbed, narrowed, then dissolved into a rutted path barely visible under fallen leaves. The cabin appeared suddenly between the trees, a squat structure of weathered logs with a single light glowing inside. Smoke drifted from the chimney, thin and steady. It looked like a place built by hands that knew what storms could do. Ethan cut the engine and stepped out. The man who opened the door did not look surprised to see him. Walter Grayson was in his late 70s, tall despite the years, his frame lean and wiry like old steel. His hair was white, cut short, his beard trimmed with the same care. Deep lines crossed his face, not from softness, but from endurance. He wore a heavy wool sweater and work pants, boots still caked with dried mud. His eyes, pale, sharp, flicked to Ethan's truck, then back. "They're alive?" Walter asked, voice rough but controlled. "Yes," Ethan said, "for now." Something in Walter's chest seemed to collapse inward. He stepped back, turning away, one hand gripping the doorframe, as if the wood were the only thing holding him upright. Inside, the cabin was warm, lit by a fire crackling in a stone hearth. The walls were lined with old photographs, military plaques, and tools worn smooth by use. 2 empty dog beds lay near the fire, blankets still folded, the way someone expected occupants to return. Walter lowered himself into a chair, staring at the floor. "They didn't come home," he said quietly. They always come home. Ethan stood near the door, giving the man space. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind outside and the pop of burning wood. After a long moment, Walter spoke again. A few days ago, they started acting strange, alert, watching the tree line, wouldn't leave my side. His jaw tightened. Smart dogs, smarter than people give them credit for. He looked up then, eyes glistening but fierce. They found something in the woods. I didn't know what. Thought it was animals. His hands clenched. Men took them. I saw the truck, red. I knew better than to chase. Ethan nodded slowly. You didn't call the police, Ethan said. It wasn't an accusation. Walter shook his head. I've seen how this goes, in another country, another war. He gestured vaguely toward the fire. People who move things through the forest don't do it because they're careless. They do it because they think no one's watching. He looked at Ethan then, really looked. You're military? Was, Ethan said. Walter gave a humorless smile. That doesn't go away. The fire crackled louder as a gust of wind rattled the windows. Outside, the forest groaned under the weight of night. Ethan sat across from Walter, the heat soaking into his bones. The old man stared into the flames, memories etched deep into the lines of his face. I didn't call anyone, Walter said softly. Not because I was afraid, because I knew what kind of men do this, and I knew what happens to people who stand in their way without being ready. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. Some stories needed to be told at their own pace. Outside, autumn wind swept through Ashwood Ridge, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. Inside the cabin, two men sat by the fire, one carrying the weight of old wars, the other the quiet readiness of new ones. While somewhere down the mountain, two injured dogs fought their way back toward the world. The clinic was quiet in the hours before dawn, the kind of quiet that pressed against the ears. Outside, the wind moved through Ashwood Ridge in long, steady breaths, rattling leaves against the windows. Inside, the lights were dimmed low, casting soft shadows across metal tables and tiled floors. One of the German shepherds stirred. It was subtle at first, a shift of muscle beneath bandages, a faint sound in the throat. Ethan noticed immediately. He had been sitting in the same chair for hours, jacket draped over the back, boots planted flat on the floor, eyes never fully closing. Sleep had come close once or twice, but never crossed the line. The dog's eyelids fluttered open. Dark eyes found Ethan across the room, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening. Recognition didn't come all at once. It crept in, tentative and fragile, as if the animal was afraid the world might vanish again if it trusted too quickly. Ethan stood and moved closer, careful not to startle it. "Hey," he said quietly. "Easy." The dog's ears twitched. Its tail gave the smallest possible movement, barely a tremor against the blanket, but the effort was unmistakable. Pain rippled through its body, and the tail stilled again. Ethan swallowed, his jaw tightening. "Yeah," he murmured. "I see you." Dr. Miriam Holt stepped in from the back room, her face drawn with exhaustion but alert. She watched the interaction for a moment without speaking, then nodded to herself. "That one's a fighter," she said. "He's been trying to wake up for an hour." Ethan glanced at her. "The other?" "Still out, but stable." She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "You planning on leaving at some point?" "Eventually," Ethan said. She studied him, sharp eyes missing nothing. "You don't have to stay." "I know." She gave a small, knowing hum and let it drop. Some people stayed because they couldn't help it. She'd learned not to argue with those. The dog's gaze never left Ethan. Its breathing steadied as his presence settled into the room like an anchor. When Dr. Holt adjusted the IV line, the dog flinched, a low sound vibrating in its chest. Ethan's hand rested lightly against the thick fur at its shoulder, steady and warm. "It's okay," he said. "You're not alone." The words weren't meant for comfort alone. They were a promise. Hours later, when the sky began to pale and the forest outside shifted from black to deep gray, Ethan stepped out of the clinic. Cold air hit his face, sharp and clean. He stood there for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, listening to the town wake slowly. An engine starting somewhere, a door creaking open, the faint clatter of a delivery truck. Ashwood Ridge was small enough that patterns showed if you paid attention. Ethan drove without destination at first, letting instinct guide him. He passed the closed diner, the ranger station, the old mill at the edge of town. The mill had been shut down for years, but the yard around it was always tidy, too tidy for something abandoned. New tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt. Fresh ones. He didn't stop. Not yet. By late morning, he was back at the cabin. Walter Grayson stood outside splitting wood, movements economical despite his age. The axe rose and fell with steady rhythm, each strike precise. He looked up as Ethan approached, reading posture and expression the way soldiers always did. "They wake up?" Walter asked. "One did." Walter nodded once. Relief flickered across his face before he buried it. They went inside. Coffee steamed in chipped mugs as wind pressed against the cabin walls. Walter sat heavily at the table, fingers wrapped tight around the ceramic. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the men who took them." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Me too." Walter reached under the table and pulled out a folded map, spreading it flat between them. It was old, creased, hand-marked in pencil and ink. Trails, elevations, notes scribbled in a sharp, angular hand. "They move through here," Walter said, tapping a narrow valley on the map. "Always at night, never the same day twice. I thought it was hunters at first." "Hunters leave patterns," Ethan said. Walter's mouth twitched. "Exactly." Ethan traced the routes with his eyes. His mind shifted gears, old training sliding into place without effort. Terrain, cover, lines of movement. "You didn't confront them," Ethan said. Walter shook his head. "I've seen men like that. They don't scare easy, and they don't stop once they start." He looked up, eyes hard. "They believe the forest erases mistakes?" Ethan met his gaze. "It doesn't." Walter studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "You're like them," he said, "but different." Ethan didn't ask which part he meant. The name Caleb Marsh surfaced later that day, whispered over lunch at the diner by a waitress who leaned too close and spoke too softly. Caleb owned the largest logging yard within 50 miles. He was a broad man with a perpetual grin and hands like hams, known for generous donations and late-night trucks, moving when no one was watching. "He's untouchable," the waitress said, glancing toward the window. "Knows people." Ethan listened. He always did. That evening he walked the edge of the forest alone, boots silent on damp earth. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need one yet. Observation came first. He found signs easily once he knew what to look for. Scuffed ground where vehicles turned without headlights. Broken branches cut clean, not snapped. The faint chemical smell of fuel masked by pine sap. Human presence trying very hard to look like nothing at all. The second dog woke just before nightfall. It came back harder, lungs pulling air in ragged bursts, muscles tensing beneath restraints. Dr. Holt moved quickly, voice calm, hands sure. Ethan stayed close, speaking low and steady until the panic ebbed. When the dog's eyes opened, they were wild with confusion. It growled weakly, then stopped when it saw Ethan. Its body relaxed inch by inch, trust overriding instinct. Ethan stayed that night and the one after, not because anyone asked him to, because he knew what it felt like to wake in pain and darkness with no familiar presence to anchor you. Near midnight, he spread Walter's map across the clinic table, adding his own notes. Lines of movement, estimated timing, probable routes. The forest outside loomed dark and vast, but Ethan saw it differently now. Not as emptiness, but as terrain. Not silence, but information waiting to be read. He marked the final line and sat back, eyes steady. "They think no one's watching," he murmured to the empty room. Outside, the wind carried the sound of trees whispering against one another, ancient and patient. Night fell hard over Ashwood Ridge, the kind of night that erased edges and swallowed sound. The forest stood tall and unbroken, a dark ocean of trunks and branches rolling beneath a cold, starless sky. Frost crept across the ground, silvering leaves and hardening mud into a brittle crust that snapped softly under careless steps. The trucks arrived without headlights. 2 of them. Both pickups rolled slowly down the old logging spur road, engines kept low, tires guided by memory rather than sight. The lead vehicle was red, its paint dulled by dust and scratches, the color muted enough to vanish into darkness. The men inside believed they knew this forest. They had moved through it dozens of times, always unchallenged, always unseen. They were wrong. Ethan Cole watched from higher ground, his body pressed into the cold earth behind a fallen spruce. He wore no camouflage beyond shadow and stillness. His breath fogged once, then he slowed it, sinking himself with the quiet rhythm of the woods. Below him, the trucks rolled past the first marker he had set earlier that evening, an almost invisible disturbance in the leaf litter that would mean nothing to anyone not looking for it. He didn't move. The men climbed out near the old cache site, boots crunching on frozen ground. There were 4 of them tonight. Their voices were low but careless, threaded with irritation and confidence. One laughed, sharp and brief. "Get this done fast," one of them muttered. "I don't like being out here this long." Flashlights flicked on, thin white beams slicing through trees. The men spread out, heading toward a shallow ravine where the ground dipped and rose again, a natural pocket hidden from the road. The spot had been chosen for convenience, not defense. It was a mistake. The first trap triggered with a soft crack, not loud, not dramatic, just enough. The man at the front lurched forward as the ground beneath his boot collapsed inward, a shallow pit giving way. He fell hard, cursing, the flashlight spinning away into darkness. His ankle bent wrong. The sound he made afterward was pure surprise, edged with pain. What the hell? Another man rushed forward to help and slipped, boots losing traction as he slid into a tangle of brush. Thorns tore at his jacket, snagged his sleeve. He swore, panic sharpening his voice. Ethan didn't move. He watched. The path behind them shifted next. A carefully loosened log rolled just enough to block the narrow exit, wedging itself between 2 trees. It didn't trap them completely. It just made escape slower, harder, confusing. Minutes passed. The cold began to work. The men realized something was wrong when they tried to pull one of the trucks forward and the tires spun uselessly, mud hardened into ridges that refused to give. One man slammed his fist against the hood. "This place is screwed," he said. "We're burning time." Fear crept in then. Not sudden, but steady. The kind that whispered questions no one wanted to answer. Why tonight? Why now? Branches snapped somewhere uphill. Every head snapped toward the sound. Flashlights swung wildly, beams crossing and tangling. Shadows leapt. "Who's there?" someone shouted. No answer came. The forest did not echo. It absorbed. From the ridge, Ethan shifted slightly, letting his silhouette break against the tree line for just a second. Enough to be seen, not enough to be understood. Then he vanished again, moving along a line only he knew, boots finding purchase where the ground was safe. The men began to argue. "You said no one came out here." I said no one lived out here. That's different. Their breath came fast now, visible in the cold. Hands shook as they fumbled with phones that showed no signal. One man's voice cracked as he laughed, a brittle sound. This isn't funny. Ethan circled them slowly, never close enough to be touched, never far enough to be ignored. He knocked loose another branch, let a rock tumble, not to hurt, to unsettle. Hours stretched. Fatigue set in, muscles stiffening, tempers fraying. The injured man shivered violently, teeth chattering. One of the others tore off his jacket and draped it over him, hands clumsy with cold. Somewhere beyond the trees, a radio crackled to life. The sound froze them all. It was old, distorted, the kind of transmission that carried weight simply by existing. The voice that followed was steady, worn, unmistakably military. "This is Walter Grayson." The men spun, searching for the source. Panic surged now, full and unrestrained. "You are trespassing," the voice continued. "You are moving contraband through protected land. You are done." Walter stood near his cabin miles away, hands wrapped around the cold metal of the radio he hadn't touched in years. His posture was straight, his voice calm. For the first time since leaving the war behind, he wasn't remembering. He was finishing something. "I have witnesses," he said, "and you've been seen." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Then sirens cut through the night. Not close at first, distant, growing. The men broke. One dropped to his knees, hands in his hair. Another bolted toward the blocked exit, slamming into the fallen log with a cry of rage. A third raised his hands without being told, flashlight clattering to the ground. When the lights finally appeared between the trees, green-striped Forest Service trucks, unmarked federal vehicles. The men looked relieved and terrified in equal measure. Agents moved in quickly, efficiently. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They had flashlights, radios, cameras. Evidence bags waited open. One of the agents was a woman in her late 30s, tall, dark-haired, eyes sharp behind clear lenses. Agent Claire Donovan, her badge read. She took in the scene with a single sweep, nodding once. "Good work," she said quietly into her radio. Ethan watched from the ridge as the men were cuffed and led away, their bravado stripped bare by cold and exhaustion. He didn't step forward. He didn't give a name. The forest exhaled. By the time the last truck pulled away, dawn was already threading pale light through the trees. Frost sparkled on branches. Birds began to stir, tentative and curious. Ethan stood alone, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, gaze fixed on the ravine that had swallowed so much silence. No gunfire, no chase. Just patience, preparation, and the quiet collapse of people who had believed themselves untouchable. He turned away before anyone could look too closely. The woods returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened at all. Late autumn settled gently over Ashwood Ridge. The sharp urgency of earlier weeks had softened into something quieter. Frost still came at night, dusting the ground silver, but by mid-morning the sun found its way through bare branches, warming the earth just enough to let the forest breathe again. Leaves no longer clung to the trees. They drifted freely now, gathering in rust-colored drifts along paths and porches, no longer resisting the season. Rook was the first to step out of the cabin. His gait was careful but steady, the faint stiffness in his hindquarters visible only if one knew to look for it. The scar along his side caught the light, a pale line against dark fur. But his head was high, ears alert, tail already swinging with restrained excitement. Ash followed close behind, larger, heavier, his recovery slower but determined. He paused at the threshold, inhaled deeply, then stepped into the yard as if testing whether the world would hold him. It did. Walter Grayson watched from a chair near the porch, a wool blanket across his knees, hands resting loosely on the armrests. The years still showed in his posture, but something in his face had shifted. The tightness that once lived around his eyes was gone, replaced by a cautious, growing ease. "They remember," he said quietly. Ethan stood beside him, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the dogs. They never forgot. The yard had changed in small but meaningful ways. A low wooden ramp now led from the porch to the ground, built with steady hands and careful measurements. Fresh straw lined the old shed at the edge of the clearing. A water trough had been cleaned and set near the fence. Nothing flashy, nothing wasted. Walter had done it himself. The idea had lived in him for years, dormant and heavy, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps for permission he had never given himself. The land behind the cabin, once used for training decades ago, had been cleared again, the fences repaired, the old kennels reinforced, not to confine, but to shelter. A place to rest, a place to recover, a place to stop running. Dr. Miriam Holt arrived that afternoon, parking her truck near the tree line and stepping out with a clipboard tucked under one arm. She looked different away from the clinic, hair loose, jacket worn soft with use. But her eyes were the same, sharp, observant. "They look good," she said, crouching to inspect Rook's movement. "Better than I expected." Ash leaned into her hand when she scratched behind his ear, a low rumble of contentment in his chest. Walter cleared his throat. "I wanted you to see it, before I make it official." She followed his gaze across the land. "You're serious?" He nodded. "Dogs like these don't belong in cages, and they don't belong forgotten." Dr. Holt straightened slowly, emotion flickering across her face, before she masked it with professionalism. "You'll have support. People have been asking already." Ethan caught that. "Asking?" "Word gets around," she said simply. It always did. By the end of the week, the first visitor arrived. Her name was Lena Brooks, a former search and rescue handler from Idaho. She was in her early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, hair pulled into a tight braid that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. The dog beside her, a graying Belgian Malinois named Kite, moved stiffly, his eyes alert but tired. Lena didn't say much. She didn't have to. Ethan saw it immediately, the way her hand hovered near Kite's collar, the way her eyes tracked exits. A familiar vigilance. Walter welcomed her without ceremony. Coffee was poured. Stories were shared without pressure. Kite lay near the fire, finally sleeping without tension in his body. Ethan took Lena out to the yard later, showing her the training obstacles he'd been rebuilding. Simple structures designed to restore confidence, not performance. "I'm not here to push them," Ethan said. "I'm here to listen." Lena nodded once. "That's rare." More came after that, slowly, carefully. A retired police K-9 with a limp, a wildfire tracking dog with burned pads and deeper scars. Each arrival was treated not as a case, but as a guest. Ethan stayed. At first, it felt temporary. A pause, a breath before moving on. But days folded into weeks, and the rhythm of Ashwood Ridge began to shape itself around him. Mornings started with frost and coffee, afternoons with training sessions that looked more like conversations than drills. Evenings with the quiet comfort of shared meals and shared silence. Walter watched it happen without comment. "You could leave," he said one evening, as the sun bled orange across the hills. "No one would blame you." Ethan looked out over the land, at Rook and Ash moving easily now, at the distant line of trees that once felt like walls. "I know," he said. "I'm not running anymore." Walter smiled then, not wide, just enough. The first snow came early one morning, a light dusting that melted by noon. Leaves clung to it briefly before surrendering, drifting down to the ground where they belonged. Ethan stood on the porch, breath fogging the air, a mug warming his hands. Rook burst from the cabin, chasing Ash across the yard, both dogs moving freely now, joy unrestrained. They skidded through leaves, collided, rolled, then sprang back to their feet in a tangle of fur and motion. Walter laughed. The sound startled even him. Ethan turned at the sound, something in his chest loosening in response. He had heard laughter in mess halls, in bars, in moments carved out between deployments. But this was different. It wasn't a release. It was a return. He stepped down from the porch and joined them, not to command or correct, but simply to be present. Ash trotted over, pressing his head into Ethan's leg. Rook circled once, then sat, tongue lolling, eyes bright. The forest watched. No cameras, no headlines, no medals, just lives settling back into place. When the sun climbed higher and the frost disappeared, Ethan stood again at the porch, looking out over the land that no longer felt borrowed. He felt it then, quietly and without fanfare. Home. In life, not every battle is loud. Some are fought in silence, by those who choose patience over violence, compassion over revenge, and presence over praise. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always come from being seen. It comes from staying, from listening, from refusing to leave someone, human or animal, behind when the world turns cold. In our daily lives, we may never face the forests these characters walk through, but we all know what it means to feel lost, wounded, or forgotten. And sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person willing to stand still and care. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can grow even in quiet places. Tell us in the comments what part touched you most, or what this story made you reflect on in your own life. And if you believe in stories that honor loyalty, healing, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling them together.